on? Just, I have to be on mute. Is that how it works?
If you're recusing yourself, you would turn off your mic and turn off your camera.
Okay.
And you can still hear, so you'll know when to come back on.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Gideon, you just give me a high sign when you're ready to.
I'm good.
We're ready.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone. This is the November 12th, 2020 Historical Commission meeting. We're holding a public hearing in accordance with the governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, general law, chapter 30A, section 20, relating to the 2020 COVID-19 emergency, and to avoid group congregation. This meeting will only have remote opportunities for participation and public access. The first item on our agenda is 16 Ladd Street, to determine if the house and shed located at this address are preferably preserved, and if a demolition delay will be imposed. Joe, I understand that you are recusing yourself on this property, so mute and turn off your video. As the applicant here, if the applicant's here, could you unmute yourself?
Yes, this is a Jean with a mask. And Norman, we're just on his patio.
Okay, Jing, nice to meet you. So let me just quickly describe how we're going to hold this hearing. First, we'll hear from the applicant, and then the commission will have an opportunity to ask the applicant any questions. Then we will hear from the public if there are any questions of the applicant. And then we will close the public portion of the hearing, and the commission will discuss amongst itself. And hopefully there's a motion, and we will hopefully have a vote. So Jing, if you would like to proceed with your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, you can. Yeah. Norman will speak for me.
Okay. We met at the site several times, and it was a hard decision to make how to preserve. We would like to keep the features of the building, but this is some of the problems that we have. What we see there now is completely changed from the original building. The windows are changed. The trim work from outside for the windows are changed. So the only characteristics of the original building is the corbels, the details of the front porch, and the attic window, which is a beautiful craftsman kind of special design craftsman window. And my expectation was, or anticipation, if we do anything, we probably have to do similar windows. Now, also the back of the building, which is a later addition, is very ugly and bulky, and that's going to be changed. So it appears to be, if we keep the front portion, and if we have a new addition where the modern portion is, we're not preserving much of the building. It's kind of a self-deception. I don't want to put it that way, but that's what it appears to be. We toured around the neighborhood to see what are the features of the original buildings that have been not altered. And we picked up some details. One of the houses was, Gideon pointed out, it was at the end of the street. The other street, which is perpendicular to Ladd at the further back. So our intention is to reuse the main features of the existing building, and also try to replicate the window design that we believe was on the original building. And I believe that probably there were shutters there, because some of the older buildings have it still. So we may also add the shutters. So all things considered, and given the fact some of the bowling floors and the stairs not meeting code, and that some of the living space will be in the attic if we keep the existing, we thought there may be advantages of, having a new structure there, which will have the main features of the historic building, well, the historic features of the building. So this is our approach at this point. And that's
Okay.
why we felt safer to go with a demo application, because it appears it's going to be 90% demo in reality.
Do you have any information about the building, about when it was built or who built it?
It was built before 1900. And it was
Right.
altered and additioned afterwards. Do you
Okay, if there's
want, sorry. Do you want us to present the information that we submitted?
No, they have it.
Okay, everybody has it. Okay.
Okay, if there's nothing further from the applicant, does anybody in the commission have any questions for the applicant?
Yes. May I?
Yes, please, Matthew.
So it sounds like you've obviously considered the fact that there may be issues with us in the things you've just said. And I wonder, do you have a plan B in case, we were to find that this house was historically significant and to put a demolition delay here? I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm just wondering if you've considered another way to approach this project if that was to be the case tonight.
Well, if you like us to make further studies and develop options, it's up to the owner if she wants to go through that. I don't mind doing it just to keep you guys happy. I just want you to be happy whatever we end up with. But we have to have a final design of, if it's a new building, which has to be kind of within your expectation. So we just want to rush out and do something and come up with a big bulky building. And we have a lot of very modernized structures over there, not very well done. So if it is well done, I think it will stand out and it will be in conformance with the historic features, which is on very few of the structures there now currently.
I was wondering, you had noted that the original windows in the front had been changed, which I had also noted when I was looking at the property today. Were there any other changes that you had noted that you think detracts from its historical status? Because frankly, that's the only thing I noticed. My observation today was that the building remains largely and almost remarkably intact.
Well, the only remaining features, as I said, would be the corbels and the detail around the front porch. I mean, we don't want to say that the shingles are of historic significance, because all the windows of the original house have been changed except the one in the attic.
Can I ask you, have you considered the possibility, instead of a side-by-side two-family, a front-to-back two-family where the rear portion of the house, which you noted is probably not original, or in any case not as significant most likely, would that be something that would work feasibly to have, the old part in the front preserved, but an addition on the rear, which would serve as the second unit?
Well, we did consider that seriously, but we did not explore to see what the end product is going to be. definitely, definitely, what's going to happen is, if we go back, this back portion will probably just go away, and we're gonna have a 2.5-story addition going at the back. And if we go to the front elevation, yeah, this portion probably will be extended a little bit, only first floor level. So that this
on the right
on the first floor, on this side, on the right side, opposite side of the porch, so that the gable at the front will keep its original characteristic. So that is a possibility, but my honest opinion was it may be like a forced attempt for preservation. And to tell you frankly, we have to develop both options to see which is more acceptable as a final product.
Are there any other commissioners who have questions for this applicant?
Yes, this is David Russo. I wonder if, in much the same way that Commissioner Walter had mentioned the possibility of some restoration activity on the property, I think if I don't dare to speak for every member of this commission, but I agree that some of the additions that were made to this property weren't very sensitive, that they're really not very important to the overall integrity of the house itself, that they can be simply removed, and then maybe a second unit could be appended onto the side or the rear or some other way to make this a more realistic opportunity for preservation. Because I certainly agree that if you look at the massing of the house, it's all still there. It appears to be a 2.5-story Victorian. I agree that one window in the very apex, the attic of the window, isn't it funny how it survives? Whether it's because the owner didn't live up there, or maybe it's unfinished, I don't know, but it was maybe neglected, I don't know, but it's there. But isn't it funny that it's still there?
Well, because they didn't bother with it.
So I just wonder, in terms of the setbacks and the overall placement of the house, does it make sense? Or what have you done to consider the opportunity for restoring this house and maybe adding a second unit off to the rear or to the side or in some other creative way?
Yeah, the only way it will work is if we have a second unit at the back. And definitely the mass of the house, I think, I'm just guessing, it's going to be a little bit bigger than what we're proposing as a mass now. So I don't know whether that's of significance to you or not, because one side currently it's only 10 feet, and we're going to end up having 13 feet. So so the house will kind of look slimmer at the front if everything is new. But again, we don't like to be discouraged by trying something just to be sure what we're going to end up with is the best solution.
Do any other commissioners have any questions for this applicant? Okay, if there are no more questions from the commissioners, then we'll open up to public comment. Does anybody on the call have any information regarding the historical nature of this property?
At least let me check my email as well.
Okay.
Mark Kravikevich has his hand up.
Yeah,
Hello.
yeah, he called us.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Mark Krichkevich, and Nessa's with me. We live on 77 Riverside Street, which is at the very butt end of Ladd Street where it joins Riverside Street. As you probably recognize, we are a Watertown historic landmark. We're recognized so by the Watertown Historic Ordinance. I'm concerned about tearing down that building. I think that would be inappropriate. I note that on the corner of Riverside Street and Ladd, a new person has bought the house there. It's a 4-unit house, which is quite in disrepair. And clearly he is not going to tear it down. He's going to refurbish it, but he's going to keep some of the essential elements. And I do not see why that the house on Ladd Street, 17 Ladd Street, needs to be demolished. To my mind, it's in keeping with other houses on that street and in our neighborhood. It has very similar characteristics, Victorian sort of single family house, the gable roof, Victorian elements. And I would think that that could be rehabbed and maybe an addition put on in the back, if that's what the new owners want to do. But I would be loath to see a new building go up in place of what I consider a building which is part of the historic fabric of this neighborhood.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Does anybody else have any comments from the public on this property?
I did not see any further emails or any emails. I don't see anyone else with their hand up in the list.
Thank you.
I did want to, I'm not sure, normally we would talk about the building cards that we shared. Did you want to reference that at all with what those ages say?
We can, sure. I was going to do that during our discussion, but David.
I wasn't sure when. I just wanted.
No, that's fine. Do you want to go ahead and?
Yeah, the first card that we had was a sewer connection in July of 1896 and a water connection in September of 1887, and the name on it said Thomas Ladd on that card. And then subsequent to that, there was a hen house, which obviously isn't there anymore. And then there was an enlargement in 1912 that cost $100 and they didn't have a size. Then they altered the hen house. It became an 18 by 20 hen house. And then in 1930, they built a 2-car garage. And in 1926, a little out of order, they altered it to a 2-family. And in 1939, it says again, they altered it to a 2-family. So I don't know if it was altered twice or. And then in 1954, there was an alteration and a conversion of the side porch into a room, which is that stucco addition on the side, it appears. And in 1993, they removed the garage.
Okay, thank you, Gideon. Commissioners, as has been my style since we've started doing this via Zoom, we're now going to close the hearing, so there'll be no more public comment, but the commissioners will discuss amongst themselves, and then hopefully it will result in a vote, a motion and a vote. But as has been my habit, I'm just going to go person by person as you appear on my screen and ask you if you have any comments. So Marilyn, you're the lucky winner for the first slot tonight.
No, I noticed that the up in the pediment, how intact it looked. And I was impressed that all the little spindles in the front porch roof around the edge there were all intact, because those things tend to get lost and never repaired, and it looks like so many lost teeth missing. But yeah, there's parts there that are still original, and the idea of building on the back of it, I hope, is feasible, because it does sound like a solution that could work, and without putting a really different building in that spot.
Okay, thank you, Marilyn. Next up is Matthew.
Well, I think that this represents the kind of historic resource that we as a committee need to be thinking about protecting in this town. And here's why. It appears to be an 1880s middle-class single-family house, Victorian style, that is quite well preserved. The best preserved house on the street. I think that the street itself is, with the exception of one post-Depression house, an example of a fairly homogeneous late 19th century, early 20th century developed street where almost all the houses were built between 1880 and 1920. None of them are as in good shape as this one is. I think because of that, even though it's not architecturally a remarkable house, I think it's significant in terms of the fabric of the neighborhood and in retaining the character of that neighborhood. I think that while I understand it may not be the most economically lucrative way to approach it, that it shouldn't be unfeasible to execute a plan similar to what we've been talking about, where you preserve the front main part of the house and build your second unit on the rear.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Susan, you're up.
I agree with Matthew, really on all of his points. But I would like to add that I think were this not a historical building that we are talking about, and a significant one for the ones that Matthew mentioned, and if we were not the Historical Commission, that I guess I would have to say that the design for the building that you proposed is a very nice design, and I really appreciate the effort that you made to recreate some of the detailing.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan. And now David Russo, do you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can. Do you have a comment?
That's great. So a few things. The research that I did revealed that it was built in about 1888, and Thomas Ladd was the original owner. And I want to echo some of the comments by Mr. Krestakevich, that I do think this is an important house on the street. And as he may not know, it's associated with actually his house. Number 77 Riverside Street is the original house on what became this rather largish neighborhood that was subdivided over a number of times in the late 19th century and early 20th centuries. When the house was sold, this is the number 77 was the George Tyler Bigelow house, built in the early 1800s, and slowly over time they subdivided it, and it became housing as our proximity to Boston became much more important and people would commute into the city, and we stopped being sort of a farm, because the Bigelow house was in fact a farm in where number 16 Ladd Street was, and the entire parcel from North Beacon to Charles River, from Watertown Square all the way up to Perkins was all farmland, all of it. So in residential, because that's what was happening at the time. And so as the owners of 77 Riverside Street bought and sold, they began to subdivide. One of the owners of 77 Riverside, his name was Ladd, and he was the one who substantially subdivided the neighborhood as we see it today. His son Thomas built this house he owned the property when this house was built in 1888. We're not sure who the architect or builder was, but he was the son, and so he's associated with the farm that still existed at 77 Riverside in 1888, because some of the land was still farmland at the time. So So I think it's important to draw the connection between the two houses and what the land ultimately or originally was, which was farmland. I think the petitioner should absolutely be congratulated for thinking about the kinds of preservation efforts in terms of replicating some of the corbels and other things. I still think the house has a good deal of architectural integrity, not only in terms of obviously its architecture, but some of the connections to the larger neighborhood. So for me, I would want to see some other options if possible here. That's what I have.
Thank you, David. Okay. Now that we've gone through all of the commissioners, do any of the commissioners wish to make a motion? And just to be clear, that the first motion would be that it is or is not preferably preserved.
I will motion that it's preferably preserved.
Okay, so Matthew Walter has motioned that Matthew, could you be more specific, because what's up for demolition is a house and a shed.
I would move that the house only be preferably preserved.
Okay, do I see a second to that motion?
This is David. I would second that.
Okay, so again, I'm going to go through the roll. Marilyn, the motion is put forth, the motion which has been put forth by Matthew is that the house only at 16 Ladd Street is preferably preserved. You in favor or against that motion?
In favor.
Susan Steele?
In favor.
And I am also in favor. Therefore, the motion passes. And I feel we should also have a specific motion about the shed, since that was included in the application. Gideon, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do want to just identify that I think that that is just a modern shed, but we don't have any record of it ever being constructed. So
Fine.
I don't know what the case, if you have to make a determination, how do you determine that it's actually 50 years old?
This is David. I saw that it was in the applicant's petition, so I certainly have no difficulty presuming it's over 50 years old. I'd be pleased to make a motion to permit the demolition of that.
I'm sorry, David, what's your motion?
I move that the shed at 16 Ladd Street is not preferably preserved.
Okay. Do I hear a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Marilyn seconded. Susan?
Yes, it's not preferably preserved.
Okay. And Matthew?
Not preferably preserved.
And I also agree it's not preferably preserved. Therefore, the motion that the shed on this property is not preferably preserved has passed. Now, going back to the house, which we have voted is preferably preserved, the next portion of that question is whether we should put a demolition delay. Do you guys want to discuss this, or do I hear a motion?
Would there be another course of action where we delay doing that until perhaps they come up with a plan B?
You mean impose a delay and invite them to come back to the commission with a plan that preserves the house?
Or delay a vote if they would be interested in coming up with a plan to do a partial demolition. I don't know if we would we have to approve a demolition of the rear portion?
Mm-hmm.
This is David. I think what you're suggesting is perhaps inviting the petitioner to come back, sort of suspending what we're doing now and waiting for the petitioner to come back with some potential options and holding off on imposing the delay if the petitioner wishes to come back with some other options, which I think would work.
Mhm.
So, Jing, if you can hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I wasn't sure. Thank you for unmuting. So just to reiterate what was just proposed, it's been determined that the home on your property is preferably preserved. And the next step would be to determine whether or not to impose a demolition delay. However, one of our commissioners has suggested that we suspend that vote, that motion and vote, and give you an opportunity to come back before the commission with some plans that preserve the house while being able to build a second unit or design it so that you can do what you want with the house while still preserving the original structure. Would you be interested in that?
Probably the time factor becomes of essence here. I would certainly encourage my client to share with you whatever future plans she has in mind and kind of get a consensus of whatever the end product will be. But if we postpone the decision, then it means everything is delayed on her side for the completion of this job. And she also has to compete with all these new developments in the town. And to tell you frankly, people would like to see a more better constructed building. And let me give you an example. When I was doing all these historic renovations in Newton, it was very expensive to refinish those features. The amount of sanding, caulking, refinishing those corbels would be very difficult to do it on site. But if you take it out, you take it to the shop and you dip it in the solution and you get all the lead paint, all the bad portions, layers of, I don't know what kind of paint by time that has been applied. You take all of those out, you give a nice finish. So
I don't mean to,
yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt, but
yeah.
I think what the commissioner was trying to do is give you a chance so that we didn't put a demolition delay on this and prohibit you from doing anything to demolish the house, which we have the possibility of putting a delay of up to a year from you doing anything. Instead of taking that vote, the commissioner is suggesting that we not vote on delaying it right now and allow you to come back with plans to see if you can create some plans that would be acceptable and the delay would not be imposed because you were not going to demolish the house. If you don't want to have that opportunity to come back with some plans, we can certainly move forward with the vote on whether to impose a demolition delay, but understanding that a delay could be imposed for up to a year tonight.
Elise, can I also just, the commission had suggested that you could look at a potential partial demolition. And so by delaying the vote, it allows you to consider a partial demolition of the rear while the hearing is still open and you could come back. And so I think that just to explain that slightly more to them.
So does that make, you understand what we're suggesting, Jing?
Yeah, I understand clearly. I actually had a discussion with Norman already. We actually have spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to do a front and back, how to make it work. It's very, very difficult, very challenging. So our conclusion pretty much was, if we get a demolition delay for a year, we will take that.
I see. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So, Matthew, thank you for the suggestion, but the applicant would like us to move forward with our vote tonight.
I understand their point of view. I think it's unfortunate, and I think I would move to put a 1-year demolition delay because I think it's worth it from the town's perspective. It's not the way we want it to end up.
Yeah, we completely understand your perspective. It is a lot of history in the house, and we get it. But to make the house to work, to build a front and back structure, including all the old elements in the building, it is very challenging, and it definitely is very costly. So from both perspectives, we decided if we're gonna get a 1-year delay, we'll be gladly take that result.
It doesn't mean we're not going to work with his preservation on the same time, but I think because time of essence for that, I think this is a safer way she likes to proceed. That's what the thinking is.
Okay, well, one of the reasons the commission exists is to try to work with applicants who purchase properties in Watertown that are preferably preserved and try to preserve the resources of our town rather than knock them down and just build something that works for the applicant but doesn't take into account the historic value to the town. But it certainly is your property, and you have the right to ask us to vote, and that's what we'll do. So Matthew has put forth I assume that was a motion, Matthew?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Matthew has motioned that we impose a demolition delay of 1 year on the property, not the shed, at 16 Ladd Street. Do I hear a second?
This is David, I second.
David Russo seconds the motion. Marilyn, in favor or against the motion?
In favor.
In favor. Susan, in favor or against?
In favor.
In favor, and I also am in favor. So the motion is passed. There'll be a 1-year demolition delay imposed on the property. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
The next item on our agenda is a discussion item, the Watertown High School building project presentation. I just heard myself say it again. I don't know where the echo came from.
Where did
Is Scott doing it?
where did Scott go?
He's right there.
I hope I'm still there.
Oh yeah, so it should be all set up for you to be able to share your screen if you'd still like to do it that way.
I would love to. Perfect, and thank you.
All right, Scott, take it away.
Bear with me for just a moment. Okay. Can all of the commissioners now see my screen?
Yes.
And
Yes.
is my audio strong? Can everybody hear me clearly?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's 2 for 2. Thank you. Thank you for providing us with an opportunity to just update the commission tonight. Our goal is to just provide you with some of the same information that we've been sharing with the community and the building committee, and just share some of our research. We have, you may be aware that we've been working on the high school project, time flies, for just a little over a year now. And the building committee and the town has not decided yet and hasn't taken a formal position on exactly what the project will be. We're in the feasibility mode now, feasibility phase. So hopefully by the end of the year, or certainly early next year, a decision will be made, and that'll still mean that we have a couple of years of design work ahead of us and before we would even get to construction. So it's a very long timeline, but for the last year, the building committee has been evaluating various options for the high school. Those options include everything from a new high school on site, a variety of different sites in the town, to a renovation in addition to the existing high school. So every once in a while, we've gone out to the community and held community forums to try to get input from abutters and community members on what some of those options might look like. And the building committee has been very sensitive to their feedback. This is just a summary of all the different forums and building committee meetings that have been held over the last year. Every time you see option 2 at any of these meetings, you see it on December 4th, you see it on January 8th, you see it on March 18th, you see it on June 3rd, you see it on July 22nd. Anything that is an option 2 involves a renovation and expansion to the existing high school building. So in addition to talking about new options, we've also spent a lot of time talking to the building committee about renovation addition options and sharing those with the community. Again, more of the meetings. Simultaneous to all of those activities, we have architects in our office who've been gathering information, not just on the history of the high schools in Watertown, but also just general history in Watertown. And I don't want to imply that we know as much about Watertown history as any of you do, but we did share a little bit of our research so far, a lot of which is borrowed from some of the work that Vice Chairman Russo has put together. A lot of other historians in Watertown have clearly worked to gather and maintain and keep a lot of the important history. But we do want you to know that we've been gathering that information because not knowing what eventually the project might be, we want to make sure that we're capable of moving in a lot of different directions. And so we do have the information around the original high school. A lot of it's fascinating, and Charles Brigham's involvement there. We also want the commission to be aware that we have worked on a lot of projects all across the Commonwealth, all across New England, where there was a desire, and we're not necessarily saying this would happen in Watertown, but in some cases, we've been asked to include important features of prior historic buildings or historic high schools. For example, in Fall River, we were asked to replicate some of the historic features, or at least respect some of the historic features and do some interpretation of them on the new high school. This just happens to show in Fall River the original BMC Durfee High School, which hasn't been a high school in decades, but is still well loved within the town. And the replication and interpretation of some of those features from the original high school on the new high school that we designed for them. So another one of our projects in Norwood, where there was a clear interest in some historic reference to the original high school. This is the original high school. This was the new high school that we designed for them. And then certainly we have the history of how from the original high school, there was movement to the Mount Auburn Street site and the new high school there, and the history of that and some of the involvement with that building. Another one of our projects, again, interpretation of historic elements. The current high school building, we've been gathering information on the current building for some time now. It was constructed in 1925. Additions occurred, and it's not our intent tonight to walk through all this in detail. The commission members are all probably quite familiar with with the high school and the various additions that occurred. They've been well documented. This is not our research or new information. It's just our gathering of the work of others within the town of Watertown. But we are familiar with some of the history and some of the features, and we've even done quite a bit of work around documenting those features for a variety of reasons. When we originally started, they were for perhaps historic preservation purposes, or references in a new building, should the ultimate project be a new building. But we've been collecting those over time. And this is just a sampling of what we have, but we certainly collected a lot of documentation on the existing building, some of the things that have been done over time, some of the key features in the building, some of the key details in the building. Some of the key exterior features of the building that we have documented. This happens to be an example, and the reason I'm showing this is because we're just coming off of our documentation on some key exterior features of the building, but there have been instances on projects where we've literally taken some key exterior features from an original building and incorporated them into the interior of a new building. This just happens to be the Quincy Middle School that we did a number of years ago, where we incorporated some exterior features into the interior. And then in the broader history of Watertown, not just the high school, but the entire town, we've been collecting a lot of information, because regardless of what the high school project might ultimately be, we knew even a year ago that a high school project like this is a real opportunity to incorporate and include the broader history of Watertown in an environment where a lot of community members are ultimately going to pass through this building. And we have found that a high school project can become a great opportunity to re-educate the entire community on their history, not just school history, but history related to the entire town. So we've begun to gather that kind of information. And we've even talked to the building committee and have some of our architectural team working on key areas in any renovation addition or any brand new building project where we might incorporate that history, and we might create opportunities to have a building that's essentially a museum for learning, and a lot of that learning can be history. So we've talked about how we might communicate those things in various parts of the building, regardless of what the project would be. This happens to be also our Fall River High School, where there's a large-scale video wall in a key vertical circulation area and lobby that constantly communicates a variety of different history of the city of Fall River. And this happens to be an example of elements we borrowed from historic buildings that were going to be demolished in Fall River to incorporate into their new high school. And these are all just examples. We regardless of what the project is, we often rely heavily on key members of the community, key members of the historic commission in any city or town to help us in determining what the significant things are that should be incorporated or included in a project. So part of our discussion tonight is just a heads up that we'll be seeking, regardless of the proposed project, we'll be seeking assistance in determining what important things should be incorporated into a new high school facility. This is also showing Fall River, where the interior of that new school has a number of very modern spaces, but in those spaces, we included a lot of artifacts that were relevant to the city. This is inside Franklin High School, which was a new high school we did a few years ago, where we told not only the story of, not only the story of the history of the high school in Franklin, but also a much broader story of various historical events in the town, in locations throughout the building. And we've also incorporated often artifacts into artwork, into buildings. This happens to be our Plymouth North High School. This is a timeline that was literally incorporated right into the walls of the new Abington High School. And again, what's the purpose of talking about this? Well, the Historic Commission in Abington was invaluable in helping us eventually determine what story we wanted to tell with regard to the history of Abington and what key events we wanted to include there. And again, these are other examples. Marshfield. I'm sorry, my screen is hesitating, so it looks a little bit spastic. Marshfield High School. We literally designed all of these plaques for incorporate. This is just a few of them, but we designed all of these plaques along with the Historical Commission to incorporate into the building, the new high school there, as part of the Museum for Learning that we were creating. Natick, we did some very similar work. These were all designed and created by our architectural team in collaboration with the Historical Commission in Natick. And this is just showing, we also have interior and exterior documentation on the Phillips building and its history. We're familiar with we have a lot of different ideas, and we're just splashing some of our ideas up to, not necessarily for any input tonight, but just to have everybody begin thinking about what the possibilities are. But we're aware of the mural paintings that exist that depict the history and how now they're kind of spread around. And there may be other artifacts within the town that we would like to combine and have consolidated to a single location. So we'll have some conversation about that hopefully at some point in time. And then we wanted to provide just a brief summary of our discussions of addition renovation to the existing high school building, because I know even though we're talking about a number of other things tonight, we have spent a lot of time focusing on addition and renovation to the existing high school building and what that might look like, what the impacts of that might be, both from an educational standpoint, an impact standpoint in terms of impact for a construction timeline and schedule, impact to the surrounding neighborhood, cost impacts. And so we've been working with the building committee on that. At this point in time, the building committee has probably seen this particular image more times than they want to think about, in that we generally start all of our discussion about the existing high school building talking about the various additions that were done over time and what the key portions of the existing high school building are. They've also seen this diagram many times, which is a timeline that starts with the original 1925 building shown here in gray, the 1934 academic addition shown in the light orange, and then the work that was done in '59 that reorganized some classrooms, added a shop on the corner, added a vertical circulation element, and then the 1981 additions in the darker orange and what the impacts of those pieces were, and then the 2004 small addition in the courtyard of the cafeteria. And we've talked to them on a number of occasions about what the various construction types, impacts, importance of all those additions are, clearly with the 1925 building being the most important piece of that campus. We've also walked through the renovations that have occurred inside the building, and these particular diagrams are pulled from a presentation we provided to the building committee on all the renovated space. And to just kind of consolidate all of the information into a couple of short statements, the green is really the only area that remains inside the 1925 building. It's pretty much like it would have appeared in 1925. And you can see the primary piece of that is the main entry lobby and then the auditorium, which sits right here on, we call it the second floor, but the entry level from Columbia Street. You're seeing the lobby location, and then there's some other classrooms in the building that haven't been touched a lot, but the primary piece that's still intact is the entry lobby and the auditorium. All the other areas have really received, in many cases, a complete gut renovation of the existing building. We've talked about the structural grid of the existing building working around certain areas where there may be a really tight structural grid. For example, this is showing the lower level cable access studio where they worked around the existing columns to create the necessary program. And we've also talked about the master plan for the town of Watertown and the desire to incorporate parking on a site such as this, where it's tucked away and is not visually as impactful as it might be if it was a large surface lot. In some of the scenarios where we remove the existing 1925 building, we actually have underground parking on the site. Clearly, with the option 2 scenarios and options where we keep the existing building and renovate and expand it, that's not possible. But we have looked at various detailed renovation and addition options to the existing building. We've detailed some of the advantages of renovation addition of the existing building. We've also identified some of the disadvantages because the site is so constrained and the existing building. The 1925 building was very nice when it was originally constructed. The intent was obviously that the entire area behind the building, between the original 25 building and the cemetery, was available as open space. That side of the building received really nice southern exposure. I'm sure it was fantastic to be inside that existing building, looking out across that open field area. Unfortunately, since that point in time, the programmatic needs for more space have increased significantly. The addition was done. In all of our renovation addition options that we presented to the building committee, we do essentially remove that entire back area. And this is shown in the dark orange. That's the newly proposed construction in this particular option 2 scenario. And there were several different option 2 scenarios that we presented to the building committee. But in all of them, the goal was to save the 1925 building. But you can see, even with that saved, we're still building out the entire site and taking over a lot of green space. But we have talked about various scenarios where the existing building could be renovated and expanded. We've also talked through how those might be phased and how we might create the necessary parking on the site without demolishing the existing 1925 building. And the unfortunate the unfortunate truth is, in all of the scenarios where we saved the 1925 building, in order to completely renovate it and to demolish and reconstruct new program space or new building around it, it's a very complex project. And this is just the aerial 3D showing the basic phases that would be required to go through. But we've talked in a lot of detail with the building committee and the community about exactly what it would take. And it's a project that is close to 6 years in duration in terms of construction. It's between 5 and 6 years, depending on exactly which scenario would be selected. And I also have to report that it's a very expensive project. Most of the variations on a new high school that the building committee has been reviewing have a total project cost in the order of magnitude of about $200 million. All the scenarios that involve renovation, addition to the existing building, and not that cost is the driving factor, but it is one factor, are the scenarios that involve renovation and addition are more in the $235 to $245 million range. So we've also been weighing that as part of our discussions. And then one of the most disappointing pieces of information that we received in this entire process of evaluating the existing building is that the existing 1925 building, as well as the 30s addition, have a very unusual interior plaster that is in fact hot for asbestos. The skim coat plaster on all of the interior finishes inside the existing high school. And I say unusual because I've been doing this for almost 30 years, and only once before have we encountered a building in the Commonwealth where all of the skim coat plaster was asbestos. And so what that means in a school project is that it all has to be removed. So all of those nice details that we were showing in the lobby and in the auditorium would have to be removed as part of any renovation to this building, regardless of what our ultimate goal was. And so in our analysis of the hazardous materials on the existing building, if the building was to be demolished, it's an expensive proposition because the asbestos has to all be removed. However, if the building is to be renovated, the asbestos abatement is even more expensive because you have to carefully go in and remove all of that. And so just the asbestos removal alone for a renovation to the 25 building is about $10 million. And so that was part of the significant increase in cost as well as we looked at renovation addition options with the building committee. This is one of our renovation addition options. This happens to be 2B. And again, anything that starts with a 2 is a variation on a renovation addition option that we presented to the building committee. This one is showing how we keep that 1925 front portion and we demolish and replace the additions with a much more architecturally blended addition that opens up the existing building to the sunlight, to the natural light from the south through the use of internal courtyards, and attempts to reorganize the interior circulation of the building in an efficient way. Also utilizing the existing Phillips building and some demolition on the Phillips site to create a new gymnasium and council on aging in this scenario. This was one, unfortunately, was one of the more expensive scenarios on how that could take place. It was a very lengthy, complex project. Even the community members who were presented with this project were, unfortunately, I have to report, were not in favor of this kind of lengthy project with the schedule and the impacts and the costs associated with it. this is looking at that same project, the option 2B scenario from just a different aerial perspective. And so that's a quick summary of some of the things we've been looking at over the last year. I know it's a lot of information, and the building committee hasn't reached a final conclusion. I will say that certainly in recent months, there are options that involve all new construction on these two sites that are gaining favor with both the building committee and the community. But we are our goal is simply to provide as much information as we can to the commission about what's happened so far over the past year and what will be happening moving forward. And then certainly share with you that no matter what happens, we have a great appreciation for the history of not only this building, but the entire town. And depending on what the future project is, we certainly want to use every opportunity available to capture that in a high school project. So it's kind of an informational sharing tonight, but I'm happy to answer any questions or receive any feedback or input that the commission members may have.
Well, I really, really enjoyed the images that you showed us of the ways in which history was reflected in the interiors of and in exteriors of the schools you've designed. It was really, really nice and fun to see. Thank you.
I really liked the idea of recycling the architectural elements from older buildings and using salvaged artifacts, as well as the historic plaques and displays. One thing I would like to note is that on the idea of referencing historic architectural elements of older properties, or just in general historic architectural elements, it can be good but can also be terrible. And I'm thinking of like kind of 1980s architecture where they would throw around Palladian windows and mansard roofs, and often the results are dreadful. So sometimes, in my opinion, you know, a well-designed modern building can be better than cheesy historical references that don't work that well.
I would just add to that. I think that it's interesting, Commissioner Walter, that Watertown is unusual in that it has a very high percentage of architects we've found, and they're very active in these projects. And it's interesting because in several of the community forums, the input that we've received has been that it would be great to, you know, utilize the building to tell a story about history. But just like your comments, a number of the architects have said that if it is a new building, that aesthetically it should really be about the future and set a tone for another era in Watertown that represents the future. Clearly with some, as I said, some historical information or revealing, you know, insight through maybe some of these timelines, et cetera. But what all of the architects, I would say, echoed your feeling with regard to if it is a new building, that we should be really cautious about any kind of cheesy references to historical elements.
Do any other commissioners have questions or comments for Scott?
The school, I guess it was the building committee from the other week when the massing was discussed. I mean, this is all new to me because that wasn't mentioned at all in in that particular meeting, when it seemed almost as if a particular option was practically the one that they were going to accept. Nothing was definite, but they didn't take into account, they didn't mention anything about keeping any part of the original building.
Yes, just in response to Commissioner Roach's comments, the building committee meeting that you're referring to was a meeting that was focused solely on option 3 scenarios.
Yeah, that one.
And yes, and those option 3 scenarios all involve new construction. So they all involve demolition of the existing building and new construction. There are certainly other building committee meetings that focused on renovation addition, but that particular meeting was solely focused on option 3 scenarios, which involve new construction. And the option 3 scenarios are the options that are now getting the most support, both from the community and the building committee.
Mm.
Any other commissioners with comments or questions for Scott?
Well, this isn't a historic question, but looking at the garage, are there ways in which you can treat the garage so that it doesn't look so invasive in the neighborhood?
There are. I should have said that when I presented that. That was the very first version of option 2B that we presented. And we did ultimately produce other versions of that option that tucked the garage away more carefully and made it much less obvious and much less impactful to the surrounding area. They were still expensive options that weren't well supported, but they did a much better job with the garage. So you are absolutely correct for pointing that out.
And the lighting also, I think, will be a big issue for the surrounding neighborhood if because that can be very, I'll use that word again, invasive also, if it's not done properly.
Always a super sensitive topic in a school that's embedded so tightly within the neighborhood. So yes, you're absolutely correct.
Thank you.
Any other commissioners have a comment or a question for Scott?
This is David Russo, if I may. I appreciate the presentation and the information you've provided. I agree with Commissioner Walter. I don't necessarily like taking bits and pieces of a structure and trying to reuse it. While I understand that maybe some historic aspects of the school and the school system and the high school may be represented in terms of maybe some narratives or something, which could be good. Sort of taking bits and pieces and repurposing them, to me, doesn't seem the right way to go. It just seems inappropriate. If we're going to preserve, we should preserve. And if we're going to build new, we should simply build new.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody from the public? Okay.
Madam Chair, if I could just real quickly, I wanted to make one note in that regard, and that's that we've been contacted by the artist who did some of the artwork in the atrium of the high school, who is interested in some preservation or reuse of that in the new building. So I did want to mention that as another thing that's being looked at as well in that genre. Hopefully, if something is able to be done, it would be done tastefully and would be a good representation.
Thank you. Okay, well, Scott, thank you very much for the presentation.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for allowing us to update the commission. I know that there's not really a formal process for an informal discussion, but we very much appreciate you making time in your schedule to allow us to just walk you through some of the things that have been going on over the last year.
Thank you. Okay, the final item on our agenda is I have to get back to the agenda so I can read it, is the Community Preservation Committee update. Susan?
Yes, we are working away at revisions to the plan, making it much more tailored to the community. And I would say that before Christmas, we will have the final draft finished. And while things can happen to schedules, we're very hopeful to get moving again in January with the process and kind of getting back to the community and applications and so on and so forth.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Thanks for doing all that extra work.
Well, it's been a lot of work, but it's been fun.
Okay, I'm glad. Okay, do I hear any motions? Is there any new business? As you stare at me blankly, I don't know if everyone's frozen or asleep, but okay. How about a motion? Anybody?
This is David. Actually, if I may, I just want to let folks know that our historic plaque program, because I can't get into the library, we're in a bit of a freeze at the moment. And so we have about 5 or 6 house plaques ready for research, but until the library really reopens, the local history room reopens, I'm kind of stuck. And so, not that I know there's not a huge upswell of angst and vitriol about it, but I just want to let people know that until I get back into the library, the plaques are kind of at a standstill.
David, could you share with me who has asked for those plaques that you haven't been able to review? And then I can at least let them know. And then we also have one check that I hadn't processed yet.
No, sure. Happy to, I'll send that to you over the next day or so. Thank you, Gideon.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Okay, I need a motion.
I move adjourn until next month.
I second.
Okay, the motion's been made by Marilyn and seconded by Susan, and I'll do the roll. Matthew, in favor or against?
In favor.
Joe, in favor or against?
In favor.
David, in favor or against?
In favor.
And I vote in favor. So the motion passes. You can all go to bed now. Thank you very much, everybody. As always, your time and effort on this commission is really appreciated. Very much appreciated. So thank you. And I guess we'll be in touch.
Night.